Well, Tony, here we are, week 2, and today we get a chance to have this conversation around what is the Bible? Since we're talking about everything is interpreted, but we are focusing on the Bible and how we interpret the Bible and do that responsibly, we probably ought to back up just a minute and let's talk a little bit about, what is the Bible? And I don't know about you, but I guess growing up, I was thinking somehow it was just one book, and it had all the, it was kind of viewed, at least in my mind, as an answer book.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you had a question, you just go to the Bible and find the answer, and there you go.
All the answers are there.
And that's so often the way I think people do approach the Bible. But the Bible is not one book, is it?
It's not. And here, I think what we want to talk about is the Bible not as a sacred text. So kind of set that aside for a minute. But how is it, we talked last time about interpreting is about making meaning, making sense of things.
Right.
So how's the best way to make sense of the Bible? And I think understanding it as a book has a lot of things that are not very helpful for us, because we think of a book, if I picked a book out of your library here in your shelves, it would have an author. We wouldn't have to ask the question of who is the author.
Right.
We wouldn't have to ask the question of when was it written, because we have a copyright. And we would probably have some information about the author on the back of the book that would tell us a little bit about who that is. So that's not what, the Bible's not that. It's not a book that we can pick up and we know all the information that we need to know about it. It has multiple texts.
Yes.
Many different texts from many different periods of time, reflecting different cultural practices.
Right.
And different ideas. And the texts themselves are not, they have particular types of literature.
Yeah.
Now, when you go to the library, you see fiction, you see novels, you see historical novels. There's sections in history, science, engineering, anything you can imagine.
Yes.
Well, the Bible doesn't have engineering, but it has a lot of different genres or types of literature. So when we go to the Bible and we read Paul's letters, that's different than going to the Bible and reading the book of Genesis.
Yes. Yeah, very good. And very, very important points for us on the Bible. And even, even when you look at it academically, but even if you were to be viewing it in that sacred sense, as you mentioned, learning to read and interpret is so important. And what you said about the books off the shelf, that's so good, so important. You're right, we don't get that with the Bible. Now, what we do have sometimes, like in Paul's letters, he will identify himself. There are places in the Bible where that's identified, although, and we'll get into this
we can't
a little
simply
later,
take that for granted.
No, we cannot. It's not as clear cut as what you were saying here. Like, what year was this written?
Mm-hmm.
What was happening? Who is the author? And more specifically, a little bit of the background of the author. We don't have all of that for the Bible. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it's an important point to make when you come to the Bible, that you not come at it or to it with and impose this false sense of, well, the Bible is just one book.
Mm-hmm.
It's many books.
Mm-hmm. And don't you think that's really important? Because I think what you're getting at is we should read the texts for themselves. We shouldn't put certain modern frameworks on them that determines the meaning, rather than letting the meaning come to us from the text.
Of course. And yet we, and yet I suppose in some ways we all do it.
Mm-hmm.
We end up, we read it from our frame of reference, from our perspective, and we often impose something on the Bible that actually violates at times
Hmm.
the text. Well, that's a strong word.
It's
Maybe
easy to do, and I agree with you. We all do it. I think what the methods try to do is to try to keep us honest
yes.
and try to make us approach it as objectively as we can.
Yeah, and that's so important in our study of the Bible. You know, the Bible isn't. It's not one book. It's many books. It's a bit like a library
Yeah,
of books, and in that library, even with the different books, wouldn't you agree that what we have a variety of voices that come from different times, who are writing in different genres.
yes,
So when someone comes to the Bible and says, "Well, reading the Bible is, I'm just going to read the text for what it says on the page," and not pay attention to some of these issues, that's where we get in trouble with the Bible.
I think so. The Bible, if we take it seriously and we read the text without trying to impose our own particular viewpoint on it, I think we can learn new things.
Right.
We can, we can't wipe away what we know, what we think, and
Right.
these sorts of things. But if we make an honest effort at reading these texts on their own, because there are many voices in the Bible. It's not just one voice that speaks throughout. There are many different. There was a theologian of the Old Testament who said the center of the Old Testament and the Bible was covenant. It's about God's working salvation. But that kind of there are other theologies present in the Bible. There's the creation theology.
Right.
There's liberation theology that we find in the prophets about the poor and the needy and trying to, we have an obligation, a moral obligation to be responsible to people who are less fortunate or to widows and so forth. So there's a lot of things in the Bible that we need to take seriously, and we don't need to read it with, one size fits all kind of mentality.
It's so true, so good, because the temptation is to come to the Bible, and I mentioned it earlier, and I think a lot of times, maybe because we've never heard, and we've never been taught how to do some of this, but often the Bible is looked at as a bit of a one-stop shop, and so I'm going to approach it as an answer book, and I'm going to ask the question, and I'm going to find the answer, and then I'm going to defend that answer.
Yeah.
Well, the problem with that, as you well know, Tony, is the Bible will provide many answers on any one question. Take the problem of evil or suffering, theodicy.
Mm-hmm.
People will often try to find meaning out of their suffering, and they will find a particular text and hold on to it as though that's the only answer the Bible gives. But that's not true. The Bible offers many different answers. And so, but that's what I love about the Bible. If you're listening and trying to, you want to learn how to do this a little better, don't give up. Don't get frustrated. The fact that the Bible doesn't provide one clear answer, I find that to be something that's actually enriching and beautiful about the text. But it leads me more toward wisdom than toward knowledge, in the sense of, well, I'm going to find this answer and then I'm going to hang on to it. Wisdom implies you have to ask questions.
It's frustrating sometimes.
Oh, you're not kidding.
The
That's an understatement.
The book of Job illustrates that frustration that we get sometimes, because when you get to the end of the book, you're left saying, well, what is the answer?
Right.
And we still don't really know why suffering happens to good people.
Right.
And why some people who are not so good seem to have everything coming their way. Why is that?
Right.
And we still struggle with that notion.
And then if you take that idea, and I know we won't go down this road too far, but but nonetheless, if you take that and you're looking for a specific answer, if you go to the prophets and read at least portions of the prophets, you get the idea that suffering, maybe something you're going through, was caused by the fact that either you did something wrong or someone else did something wrong. That idea of divine retribution. So you go, oh, well, that must be the answer. Well, then you go over to Ecclesiastes, which, by the way, is in the Bible. And, you know, the race doesn't always go to the swift. Battle doesn't always go to the strong. Time and chance happen to us all. Now, which is it?
And that's part of wisdom, part of knowing we don't have all the answers. And the Bible sometimes leaves us with the questions rather than the answers.
Yes. And that's one of the things I love about the Bible as I've gotten older even. And, you know, I think what that does, in some ways, if you're listening to this and it's the first time you've heard this, it can be a bit threatening, I suppose.
Yeah.
So many of us, we kind of concede the idea of knowing how to read and interpret a text. We concede that to a person of authority. If you're in a faith community and you have, you know, we're going to concede that to the preacher or to, and I'm not making light of that. I served many years as a pastor, but each one of us have the opportunity. We're invited into this text to take it responsibly and to learn how to do this and read this in a way that is, yes, it can help make meaning in our life, but it does it in such surprising ways when you read in the way we're talking about reading the Bible.
And going back to the metaphor of the Bible being a library, I think that's so much more helpful to understanding, because it's a text, a book that has a collection of many, many different things, many different genres, many different ideas, perspectives. And so when we go to it, we have to kind of be open to that. And one of the ways of doing that is, as you know, we're going to talk about probably next week, the history of that. There are other ways of doing it, not just historical. But historical is helpful, and it helps us to put it in a particular context so we understand what's going on when it's written. But, you know, one of the things in teaching intro to the Old Testament or to the New Testament, and by the way, we probably should refer to it as the Hebrew Bible. Old Testament is a term that Christians use to refer to the Hebrew Bible. But the Hebrew Bible is got a lot of different perspectives in it, and we need to take them seriously. And when I was teaching the Old Testament, it was difficult to know how to help students understand this, because the question of who, that we'll talk about a little bit next time, that's not a simple question.
No, it's not.
And you could spend an entire semester talking about who wrote the Torah. You know, tradition tells us it was Moses. But that's tradition. That's been passed down over many, many years. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the answer to that from an academic perspective. So these are questions that are not simple. They're questions, you know, that involve historical kinds of information that we can determine, archaeology, many different things contribute to the answer to these questions.
Exactly. The thing, I was drawn to your idea in the library. If you go to the library, which across the street from where we are here in Founders Hall, but if you go there, you find different sections, right? You were mentioning that. Fiction, nonfiction, all different areas. And the Bible has some of that. Like, I know you teach a course on wisdom literature, so there's a section of the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, that's known as wisdom literature, and the prophets you mentioned. And then you get to the New Testament, the Gospels, and the letters. So knowing all of that helps us a great deal. It can help us to know, okay, which section of the library am I pulling from, and what am I reading here? And as you said, when we get into the history of this, I think it was very helpful to me as a student to learn this years ago, and still to this day in my reading of the Bible. And one thing I want to address too, with this, some people are either hesitant or afraid, or just finally go, well, you know what? Why would I want to spend time learning how to do this? Well, if you want to read the Bible and read it responsibly, and find, something of meaning, or then you want to learn how to do this and do it in a way that can be helpful, and doesn't take the Bible and use the Bible for our advantage, which I think a lot of times we do.
Yeah.
We use the Bible to prove our point.
Proof texting.
And if you and I, we could sit here right now and demonstrate that. I could take a text, we could take a topic. I could take a text, you could take a text. Here we are in two chairs, and we could take opposite viewpoints, and we could defend that from the Bible, probably.
Yes, we could.
And that happens a lot.
Yes, and that's the way I grew up. You were looking for ammunition,
Right.
to hold over your other people's head to see, to show where they're wrong about things.
I'm right, you're wrong. Sorry,
Exactly.
wish you could be here with me.
Unfortunately, I'm revealing some things about us. But
No, it's fine.
I understand those kind of temptations to do that.
So
And,
do I.
another thing, we're going to talk about literary approaches later, but
Right.
one of the things I learned from the study of the Bible is don't read it like you're reading sometimes we read things in the modern world and we're in a hurry. We don't have much time. And so we just fly through them and we skim them or whatever.
That's right.
But you cannot really appreciate the narratives and the stories in the Bible if you don't read them closely and pay attention.
That's so important. It's important academically, I would say, even on the other side, and we're not talking about this, but primarily, but on the spiritual formation side, the same is true. You can't rush past the text. I'm going to read the Bible through. I'm going to read it all the way through this year.
Yeah,
Well, good for you. That's great. I've done it too. But here's the deal: how much did you gain from it? How much did you learn about the Bible?
Yeah.
You see, therein lies the difference.
And a good example of that would be, say, well, I'm going to sit down and read the Psalms from 1 to 150.
Right.
And then we come with Psalms that are praise Psalms,
Right.
followed by lament Psalms, followed by maybe trust Psalms.
Yes.
All this variety of literature, and we're trying to read it like we would read a novel,
Right.
rather than take each one separately. Maybe we should try to read all the laments at one time,
You're right.
all the praise at one time, and so forth. And we learn much more than just saying, like reading through the Bible
You're right.
at one time.
That's so good, Tony. I think that's helpful because we do that. We often will. It's like imagine. I'll go back to your metaphor of the library, and in different sections, it'd be like opening a nonfiction book and trying to gain some information and jump over to the fiction side. And so you're moving in all these areas, trying to make sense of something that would be much more helpful if you would sit with it and read it, and even it's an old word, ruminate, reflect upon it, learn what you can, do the research, all of that, all the above. But that's so good.
So the looking at the Bible then as a embodiment of many different viewpoints, many different kinds of literature, coming from a period of time far removed from us.
Right.
It is helpful then to try to familiarize ourselves with that historical period of time.
Right.
And then we may understand it in ways that are much better.
Right. How do you do that as an individual, as a teacher, when you as a student? I mean, how do you do that? How do you? I think that'll be a question that comes up for some of our viewers.
Hmm.
How does one go about doing that?
Well, I think it's different. If I were reading it for literature, it would be different. But still, I'm informed by what I know of the historical.
Right.
So I think trying to learn as much as you can about, if you want to read the Hebrew Bible, knowing as much as you can about the history,
Yeah.
about archaeological kinds of things from reputable scholars.
Right.
Learning those things fills in a lot of the gaps
Yeah.
that we have that helps us to understand. Asking simple questions that are highly complex, but even, and we'll talk about this next time, but asking questions about who, who wrote
Yeah.
it. It may not be an individual. It may be best we might be able to say is this comes from a community, or it
Right.
may come from a scribe. But we, with the exception of Paul and a few texts in the Bible, we may not ever know the name of the person. It reminds me of what I heard about the book of Hebrews. Someone said only God and the author knows who is the author of that book.
Our authors.
Our authors.
Yeah.
And we have to kind of realize that, but we can still talk about when it was written,
Right.
why it was written, to who's being addressed.
Right.
And all of these things is a way of trying to understand it. Then we could add some literary to that,
Yeah.
the language of the text. So if we know who the audience is,
Right.
reading the text and focusing on the language of that text
Right.
may help us understand how the author was trying to convince his readers
Yeah.
of a particular viewpoint.
That can be very helpful. What you just said, sometimes I've found even in the letters of Paul, that kind of idea of getting behind that and knowing something of the audience can be helpful in reading and coming at an understanding.
And there are a lot of helpful sources for giving us
Yeah,
a basic
that's what I was-
idea
yeah.
of the history.
And I hope we can do one of these lessons on some of the sources that we found to be helpful.
That would
some
be
of the
helpful.
tools
We should.
that we found, because I think a lot of people will ask, what do I
Where did I get started?
where do I get started?
Yeah.
And I think that can be helpful. I like the questions you were talking about around the text. There are some questions even in the historical method that we're going to really unpack next week.
Mhm.
What are some of those for you?
Well, as I said, the basic questions of who,
Yep.
what, when, where, why. These are all questions that we always ask of things.
Yeah, of
They're a
course.
way of kind of getting to know more about our world. And these are probably the best questions to ask of the text. Now, sometimes with certain methods, you have to do some things before you can even get to the who.
Yeah.
And that's where the complexity comes in.
So yes. But see what you just said. That's so helpful I think to all of us, and I hope I hope we'll take that seriously. Asking those questions of the text, helping us understand the historical sort of context of the text itself, can be so helpful. It requires, I don't know about you, but I think it requires a certain to ask those kinds of questions of the text instead of what can this do for me, not what it means or how can I understand it. It requires a bit of humility on our part. I know that's an old word, but that we don't come at the text as though what we're going to impose on it is the final word.
Yeah.
That we acknowledge our own, that we kind of acknowledge that we do it. We have to kind of know where we're coming from with the text, but a certain humility that can ask these kind of questions, and I think also curiosity, a creativity.
One of my professors, Dr. William Bellinger, he coined, I guess, the term the hermeneutics of curiosity.
Yeah, I like that.
And
Yeah.
so I think that's a good way of approaching it, of being curious about the text and wanting
Right.
to know more and wanting to explore it. Um, the I remember I read one time I don't know if he was a theologian or a biblical scholar, but he talked about the difference between what the text meant and what it means.
Mm.
So you mentioned a while ago, we want to jump, we want to forget about the question of what it meant. We want
Right.
to talk about what it means.
Yes.
But I think, and some scholars wouldn't agree, but I think that we need to focus time on what the text meant before we can begin to talk about what it means. Maybe a better
Yeah.
metaphor would be to how do we recontextualize the text?
Yeah.
How do we make something that was speaking to an audience hundreds and hundreds of years ago relevant to today without misinterpreting it?
Yeah. Can just a quick example? You know, in Paul's writings, he is talking. There was an issue about can I buy and eat meat that was offered to idols?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if I go down to Publix, there's not that section in the meat section now. I don't have that issue. We don't face that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you go, well, I guess that doesn't have any meaning for our time. But what you were saying about recontextualizing
Mm-hmm.
the text is that the principle behind that was, well, you know, where Paul comes out at is, you know, are you free to do it? Sure. If it causes someone else to stumble, then don't. I'm paraphrasing, but don't go out and parade your freedom for someone else who may not see that as freedom.
You know, I think that's a wonderful example, because once we get past the historical to what does it mean for us now,
Yes.
there are all kinds of people could weigh in on that. Is
Yeah.
it really better to just allow someone to remain in ignorance and not try to enlighten them?
Right.
Should we just, should we take Paul's advice there, or
Right.
should we push things?
Right. See, those are
And that's an ethical question, and I'm not sure how to answer that.
But the beauty of that is that's where something like wisdom can emerge in asking those kinds of questions. And even imagine this, if you're doing that individually, but if you're doing it together even as a class or in a group, you would get all kind of responses
Mm-hmm.
in that, which is the beauty of I think the beauty, one of the things about the Bible that I find so helpful and beautiful is that it does evoke those kinds of questions
Mm-hmm.
that causes me I'm like Jacob in the river, you know, who am I struggling with here? And I found the Bible to be much like that it's not easy. It's not just a simple matter of I'm going to read a text and then tell you what it means. That, you know, a lifetime of living, and we've both been living with this one book, which is not one book, a library of books. We've been living together, looking at, reading, studying this text for a lifetime. And yet here we are, and neither one of us would sit here and go, oh, we've got the answers. You just sit and listen. No, we teach, but we both do it still with a sense of recognizing that there are many questions that we still don't have the answer for. Is that fair?
That's fair. And in the classroom, that's one of the things that I love about teaching, is because out of nowhere, someone comes up with a question or a challenge
Yeah.
or an inquiry that we think, well, I haven't considered that.
You're right.
And so there's room for revelation
Right.
in that conversation.
So true. That's helpful, and that's happened to me. That's happened to me a lot too across the years, and I love those kind of conversations. And I love that we haven't said this maybe on this podcast yet, but to have the opportunity in a state university where there is academic freedom to be able to ask those kind of questions, and to have students, quite honestly, that are in our program who come at it from such different perspectives. See, that's where some of these ideas and questions come from. Someone asks a question of you as a teacher of the text, and you go, I don't know that I ever asked that. And yet in the exchange, something new emerges.
You can discover
and it may not
something.
be an answer. It may be a new question, but nonetheless, it's something that gives life.
I think there's a lot of truth
Yes.
that we find, and it's not all obvious.
Right.
And sometimes it's personal revelations of things that we
Right.
get, but part of that is sparked by our understanding of some of the broader questions that we're talking about today.
Yeah. So next week, we plan to dive a little more deeply. We're going to kind of get in the weeds a little bit about how to read the Bible through the historical lens.
There are many different historical approaches. I won't go into them.
Yeah.
We certainly don't have time to cover them all. Maybe cover one or two that are particularly useful or interesting. But there are a lot.
Yeah.
And so hopefully you'll want to know much more. And maybe eventually we can talk and go into more detail about, we could focus on just one method, and we could probably spend a few hours just going through that. So
no doubt. We'll try to give examples that will be helpful to those of you who are watching, and we thank you for watching. If you want to join the conversation, a couple of things you could do for us. You could share the link with your friends or family, someone that's interested in this study. And the other thing, if you want to reach out, you can find Dr. Moyers, find him at tony.moyers@athens.edu. Or if you want to reach out to me, it's robert.white@athens.edu. And we would be glad. If you have questions or ideas, we'd be glad to hear from you. We'd love to hear from you. So, well, Tony, again, thank you for this opportunity.
It's a great conversation. I enjoyed it.
I have too. And look forward to next week.
Yes.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.